Now, as we already stated, the rebellions were happening during the reign of Nero from one end of the empire to the other. And the Parthian king, Vologius I of Parthia, in 58 BC, he challenged the Roman rule by putting his brother, Tiridates, on the throne of Armenia. So Nero sent Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo, and he launched a campaign to reconquer Armenia. Now, despite Tiridates' implacable guerrilla warfare, the Roman army managed to seize the ancient capital of Artaxata by the end of the year. So this is a Roman victory against the Parthians in this battle. Now this brings us to the next battle of Tigranocerta. This was also in 58 AD. Now, Tiridates was driven south, and Corbulo marched in pursuit. Vologius sent troops forward to harass the marching columns, but he could not halt them. Now, Corbulo marched steadily forward, and he entered Tigranocerta. He installed Tigranes, a friend of Rome, on the throne. Now, this had brought peace only for a few years. So this is another Roman victory. So two Roman victories here against the Parthians. Now, this brings us to 60-61 AD, back on the island of Britain. Now, the king of the Iceni, he was in cooperation and had good dealings with the Romans, and the Romans treated them fair. However, he died. And when he died, the Romans decided that they were not going to deal with the Iceni, and they wanted everything for themselves. And so his queen, she didn't like that, and she wasn't going to put up with this. Well, the Romans came in to teach her a lesson, and they bullwhipped her in the village in front of everybody. And it's also reported that the Romans raped her daughters. And this is how the mismanagement and the plunder on the part of the Romans made it easy for rebellions and Queen Boudica to rally the people. Now, she descended on the undefended town of Comilata first, and the frenzied tribesmen slaughtered the Roman settlers and Britons who were collaborating with the conquerors. The 9th Legion hurried down from Lindum and were overcome by sheer numbers and virtually annihilated. The 2nd Legion commander, Postumus, refused to leave his camp. Now, there was two other legions, the 14th and the 12th, under the governor of Suetonius Paulinus, who stood in Wales. However, before they could intervene, Boudica's rebels swept down on Lawdon. Now, this city was burned to the ground and its inhabitants massacred. The terror of Lawdon was suffered also by Verulamium in the same bloody fate. Some 70,000 people are reported to have been killed in the three onslaughts. So we're giving Queen Boudica a victory here and a loss to the Romans for defeating the 9th Legion. So the next battle that ensued, we're calling it the Battle of Verulamium because that was the closest town. But Paulinus, with 10,000 men, roughly his two legions, arrived on the scene. He chose his ground carefully, being vastly outnumbered. He had a defile with woods and hills protecting his flank and rear. The Britons, thinking another easy victory, they brought their families to watch. In wagon trains, they were all coming out. The Britons hurled themselves into the narrow defile, but were met by a barrage of Pila and Roman charges, adopting a wedge formation. The Britons were compressed between the wedges and they could not wield their weapons. They were pushed back onto the spectators who were watching in their wagons. The battle was fought without mercy. They spared no one, and possibly over 50,000 men, women, and children were killed. The Romans only lost about 400 to 500 men. Queen Boudica poisoned herself. Paulinus was ranked at this time as one of the best Roman generals in the West in the 1st century. Posthumus, remember the commander that would not leave his camp? He killed himself after hearing about this battle. So this is a Roman victory. Now this brings us back to war with the Parthians again. This is in 62 AD. And this battle was at the Arsenius River, and Volgius remained hostile in the east. He launched a two-pronged attack on Syria and Armenia. Corbulo withdrew his main body to guard against the invasion of Syria, calling on Rome to send a second army to Armenia. Nero, who was dissatisfied with this, sent a new general to direct the offensive. His name was Patius. He launched a bold attack and soon found himself outmaneuvered and surrounded by the Parthians. Corbulo rushed to the rescue but did not arrive in time to prevent Patius' surrender. Now, despite this, Corbulo negotiated a peace. Volgius' brother was allowed to remain as king of Armenia but as a Roman vassal. Corbulo was ranked as the greatest general in the 1st century in the east side of the empire. But this is a Roman loss to the Parthians. Now this moves us to one of the biggest revolts that the Judeans have. They've had quite a few revolts. This is one of the biggest ones against the Romans. Now, we all heard of, I believe, Josephus, who was a Jewish historian. He was actually involved in this rebellion, and he writes about it in detail. Now, this revolt was a product not only of economic causes, but of outraged religious susceptibilities. The Romans in general were tolerant of religion, but they did not know how to deal with religions which were themselves very intolerant, like the Judean faith. Now, this brings us in 66 to the Battle of Bezetha. So, mismanagement by the Roman officials coupled with the terrorist activities of the Zealots brought anarchy in Judea. The Roman garrison in Jerusalem was overpowered and butchered. Cestius Gallus, governor of Syria, led a legion plus auxiliaries into Jerusalem, but he could not take the temple. Unable to gain supplies, he began to withdraw. As he was outside of Jerusalem, his force was attacked by a strong force. The Romans lost 6,000 men, all their baggage, and their siege train. Gallus fell back to Syria. Nero then sent Titus Flavius Vespasian to Judea. This brings us to the Battle of Jotapata in 68 AD. Vespasian, he marched into Judea ahead of 60,000 soldiers. There followed one of the bloodiest campaigns of the Roman Empire. The Jews lacked arms and training, but their fanaticism made them feared opponents. Josephus directed the defense at the fortress of Jotapata. It was too strong to storm, so Vespasian laid siege to it. 47 days after a bitter struggle, Josephus surrendered the fortress and the Romans sacked it. Vespasian then marched from town to town, reconquering them, and he passed Jericho and headed straight to Jerusalem. Now it's about 69 AD at this time, which brings us to the year of the 4 emperors, and then we'll come back to Jerusalem in 70. Now, the year of the 4 emperors starts basically in 69. It really started in about 68 October, but historians just call it the year of the 4 emperors, which is in 69. And this is significant in the fact that we were looking at these insurrections, and the point of this is Roman mismanagement, Roman brutalities led to revolts all over the empire. Also, it showed that the provincial governors were able to handle these insurrections. And it also showed us that individuals such as Arminius and Scaravor, people like Sertorius in the past, Vercingetorix, these were all Roman officers. And as we're going to see later, Saturnius, all Roman officers that led their regions into revolts against the Roman brutalities and mismanagement. So at this point, you can see, because these provincial governors were able to provide these ambitious leaders, it was only a matter of time before these provincial rebellions would aim to overthrow the emperor himself. And that's what we're seeing right here in 69. And I'm going to try to lay it out how it happened chronologically here. And there's a lot of detail, but of course, we don't have time for that. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. Now, the first thing that took place was a Gallic governor, Julius Vindex. He had been defeated and killed by troops from the Upper Rhine province. Now, this gave the legions there the belief that they were protecting the empire and consequently were making demands of their own against the emperor. But it was in fact the governor of Spain, Galba, who was making these suspicious claims to restore the republic he had supported before the empire. And coupled with these revolts in Britain, Judea, and the insurrection in Gaul, and Nero being a paranoid narcissus, he prompted the Praetorian Guard to act again. Now, the Senate was bribed by Galba, and the Senate declared Nero an enemy of the state. Now, the Praetorian Guard, they proclaimed Galba emperor. Now, when Nero heard the news, he planned to leave town in disguise. He had asked the Praetorians for their support, but one guard replied to him and said, "Is it so bad to die?" And Nero knew he was done for, and he was going to kill himself, but the story is he had a slave do it. And thus ended the Julio-Claudio dynasty in 69. Now, Galba, in the meantime, he marches to Rome from his territory in Spain. He attacked any city that did not support him, and he killed a few senators as well. Now, he started changing policy immediately, so he went right to work when he got to Rome. Now, Galba made the mistake in that he wasn't paying back the people that helped him become emperor. Also, remember the legions on the Upper Rhine that first were making demands to the emperor. When they saw this happening, they nominated their general as the new emperor, Aulus Vitellius. And Galba, he had quickly nominated his successor to the throne, and this disappointed Marcus Otho, who was Galba's military adherent and helped bribe the Senate. So he was helping Galba, and he didn't like that Galba didn't choose him as his successor. So he, in turn, conspired with the Praetorian Guard. Now, the Praetorians dragged Galba into the street and murdered him. So this is cool. When you're walking down the Forum and you're seeing this stuff, you can just picture somewhere around here. Remember, this is the Senate Curia. Maybe it was outside here. Who knows? Outside either Augustus' palace or something, or one of these temples. But the Emperor Galba was murdered right in the street. Now, he was emperor for, they figured, now remember, he was proclaimed emperor before he even reached Rome. But if we want to start counting when he reached Rome, he was emperor for about 4 months. And it started in October of 68, okay? Now, Otho then took over. Now, Otho's emperor now, but remember, Vitellius is coming from the Rhine region. Now, this brings us to rule number 9. Who needs the Praetorian Guard when you have an army? So remember, nowadays, the way of gaining the emperorship was to have an army behind you. Now, this brings us to the Battle of Bedrekin. Now, this is a Roman civil war, so it doesn't go on the Roman battle record. This is obviously in 69 AD. Vitellius, he sent 2 legions through the Alpine passes into Italy under Caecina and Valens. Otho hurried northward, and he attacked with his advanced column before the rest of his army was there. The emperor's legions were checked and thrown back. Although this was a setback, the fight could have continued. But Otho, after 3 months, chose to commit suicide. So here's Otho now, who became the second emperor, Galba for 4 months, Otho for 3, and he just chose to commit suicide. Now, if that wasn't enough, in the meantime, the eastern legions of Syria, Egypt, and Judea, they all proclaimed their general, Titus Flavius Vespasian, as emperor. Now, the Danube legions also accepted Vespasian. Antonius Primus, Vespasian's commander, he marched 5 legions, 40,000 troops in all, from the Danube to Italy. He didn't even wait for Vespasian. So Vespasian left his son Titus in charge to finish the siege of Jerusalem. That was the last city he hasn't taken yet. While he went to Egypt and took control over the grain supply, and this gave Vespasian total control over Rome and made him a powerful man. Vitellius was in a good situation to do some good things for the empire, but he didn't. He didn't grant funeral arrangements to his legions that were killed. His legions marched in a state of drunken euphoria, creating havoc as they went. And he was honoring himself and stuff like that. So he wasn't doing a very good job at all. Like Galba and Otho before him were trying to pass some good laws and stuff, but this guy was doing nothing. And in a couple months, he had to meet Vespasian's legions in battle. And this will bring us to the second battle of Bedarapium, which is located on a nice plains, perfect for fighting pitched battles. And so legions coming into Italy, this would be a perfect spot to fight. So this area was always, battles were going on in this area. Now, Primus had took up positions astride a road with 5 legions plus auxiliaries. Primus screened this setup with his German horsemen. Vitellius sent Ficino with 4 complete legions and detachments from 7 others and auxiliaries. Ficino attacked at night, and he put his artillery on the road. The fighting continued through the night. The artillery was wreaking havoc on Primus's legions, but then a few soldiers had infiltrated the lines and destroyed the section of ballista that was wreaking the most havoc. Now at sunrise, Primus's 3rd Legion started cheering for the brave legionaries that took out the artillery being used against them. However, because of this, Cocina's soldiers lost heart and started to withdraw, for they feared that the enemy was cheering because they had reinforcements coming. Cocina ran and left his army leaderless, and they retreated toward Cremona. And Primus's legions, even though exhausted, pursued. The Vitellian army turned and put up a savage fight. For a day and a night, finally the leaderless Vitellians were defeated and Primus burned and sacked Cremona. Primus marched to Rome, where another army of Vespasian's was already there with legions from the east. Vitellius tried to abdicate, but his friends resisted. Much of Rome was destroyed in the ensuing struggle. Vitellius was killed. Vespasian then arrived after the fight and was proclaimed emperor. And this starts in 69 AD, the Flavian Dynasty. Now the situation in 69 was that legions of one province, they were not in accord with those of another, and this was all too familiar from here on out. Now by all appearances, the situation here in 69 was basically the situation that was scurried around in the last century of the Republic, and it was just repeating itself. Now, up until Nero, the dynastic prestige of the Julio-Claudio dynasty preserved the empire, but now, once again, you need strong leadership to bring the empire back into one unison, unified control, and Vespasian was that leader. He was 60 years old and he reigned for 10 years. He also commissioned the start of the Colosseum. Now, back to the military situation. Now, as he is establishing his control over Rome, he needed to quickly control the area around the Rhine, where Vitellius was from. In Gaul, Vespasian, he had Julius Sevilius create a diversion against Vitellius's Rhine legions and raised auxiliaries from the Gallic tribes. And this would be a problem because when the Civil War ended, Julius commanded a strong force now, and this force supported a small uprising in Gaul. The troops he raised lived in the area and supported their own towns and kin, and this would be a lesson hard learned. Now, after the Civil War, this brought a series of insurrection amongst several Gallic and Germanic tribes, led by Julius, the chief of the Batavi, who Vespasian had used to raise legions to hamper and cause diversion against Vitellius's legions there. Now, the Treveri under Julius Classicus and Julius Tutor, and the Legones under Julius Sabinus, they all joined the revolt. Now, Cerealis, he marched into Gaul at the head of 6 legions. Now, fortunately for Cerealis, the enemies were not combined and did not coordinate with each other, and he defeated them piecemeal. He crushed the resistance in France, then he moved against the Treveri, and at the Battle of Treves, he defeated Julius. This defeat took the heart out of the rebellion. Vespasian then instituted administrative reforms in that he realized that when you have legions raised in the same area that they were there to police, that they usually supported their own kin and their own townspeople. And you can see, like the map here, they would recruit in these sections. Each section they would recruit the troops, and they usually stayed in that area. Well, from this point on, they didn't do this anymore. The lesson learned here was that now that troops that were raised in one area, they were sent to far off areas to serve. So this would be common practice from now on in the empire. Now, another very important battle that took place in 70 AD was the Battle of Jerusalem. Now remember, Vespasian left his son in charge at the siege of Jerusalem because he left to go claim the throne. Now they had already conquered all of Judea except for Jerusalem. Now Titus had 4 legions there plus auxiliaries, and he was surrounding the city. And the zealot leader, Eleazar, he had put up stubborn resistance. Now Titus finally penetrated the northern suburb at Bezetha. Then, in one of the most desperate struggles in history, the Romans fought their way into the city, and they had to contest street by street, building by building, and they razed the city to the ground. On August 29th, they had fought a brutal fight for the temple, which was sacred land to the zealots, and they finally burnt the temple down. Now, interesting fact, Titus gave orders that the temple was not to be burned. Now, again, I don't know if people believe in Jesus Christ or not, but Jesus Christ had predicted 30, 40 years earlier that the temple, not one stone would be left upon another. But here you have a Roman commander telling his soldiers to not destroy the temple and burn it down, because he has to institute some kind of law and order when this battle is done. And if you destroy the people's hope in their temple, it's going to be hard to do. So he didn't want to destroy the temple. And the Roman soldiers do not go against their leaders. I mean, it's punishable by death. So here you have Jesus Christ predicting that one stone would not be left upon another. And on the other hand, you have a Roman general telling them not to burn down the temple. But what happened? A flaming arrow had actually caught the gold mortar, because they used gold to fill the bricks of the temple, and it caught fire and the gold began to melt. Well, the soldiers, seeing this, they tore the temple apart, getting the gold and taking the gold. So they tore the temple down to the ground and did not leave one stone upon another. So very interesting fact there. Anyways, when the temple was burnt down, 9 days later, the rest of the city fell. Josephus said 1,100,000 people perished. The Romans sold thousands into slavery. And the Romans always punished political rebels far worse than like any barbarian opponents. And they destroyed their cities, making examples out of the people, because this showed examples to other cities that would put up resistance if they dared to fight the Romans, what would happen to them. So that's two victories for the Romans there, Treves and Jerusalem. Now, Flavian Titus, he becomes the new emperor in 79. Remember, Vespasian only lasted 10 years. He becomes the new emperor from 79 to 81. In his reign, some disasters hit, like Mount Vesuvius erupted and wiped out the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and Titus immediately toured the area and provided relief. While away, a fire started in Rome that lasted for 3 days and nights. This is a cool shot of a building I just took showing the burnt scars on it. A lot of Roman buildings in the Forum, it was built, it was burnt many times, but this just shows the evidence of the buildings being burnt. Anyways, after that fire, then a plague hit, and he tried everything possible to constrain it. So Titus had to take care of some stuff, so he was pretty capable emperor. Now, he ended up officially dedicating the Colosseum in 80 with 100 days of games. In 81, he went to his family villa where he came down with fever and died. Many suspected that his brother Domitian poisoned him, but Flavian Domitian becomes the new emperor in 81. At the point where you climb towards the Palatine, this is the Arch of Titus, and it was erected by Domitian in memory of his brother, the deified Titus, to celebrate his triumph in the Jewish war, as shown by the dedication on the side here with the Romans carrying off booty from the temple. Now, to wrap up Part A, first century Rome, we move to Britain. And Britain has been conquered basically by a great Roman commander, Agricola. And in the Chaldean area, which is modern Scotland, they ended up revolting. And in 84 BC, it comes to the Battle of Mons Graupius. And the governor was Agrolea. And the legions marched northward, and they encountered 30,000 rebels under Chalcicus. And the Chaldeans attacked fiercely, but were bloodily repulsed by the heavier armed and better drilled legionaries. 10,000 Chaldeans were killed to the Romans' 360. This ended all organized resistance in Britain. Britain was to remain one of the quietest provinces under the Romans' 45 controlled provinces throughout their history. Now, this moves us into 90 AD, the end of the century, and it's the Danube Wars. Now, understand, Gaul and the Rhine area here has been a constant source of fighting, rebellion, raising legions, and a lot of Roman legionaries were being trained and raised in the Gaul area. But this shifts down in the Danube, Pannonian area. Eventually, this area becomes the prized area for some of the greatest Roman generals and legions. Now, contact between the Romans and the Dacians across the Danube had been going on for a couple centuries, and royal hostages would be exchanged, runaway Roman slaves would go there, but all this came to a head more in the end of the first century under Domitian's rule, because the constant raids by the Dacians into the Moesia area gave the local governors and chieftains there cause for concern. And so Domitian acted. And this basically brings us to the campaign in 89 to 91 of Moesia, and in which I give the Romans a draw for this. The new chief and greatest chief, Decebalus, he crossed the Danube and he captured Moesia. Now, Domitian hurried out of Rome to put down this invasion. Cornelius Fuscus was in charge of the Roman legions in the area, and he was defeated while trying to cross the Danube to invade Dacia. So 2 years later, Calpurnius Julianus struck north across the Danube, and he defeated the Dacians. Now, this forced Decibellus to form an alliance with other German tribes, such as the Marcomanni and the Quadae. Now, rather than risk further fighting, Domitian negotiated a peace with Decibellus, and this aroused bitter opposition in Rome. Now, Domitian started off very well because he followed a rule, and I call it rule number 10. He paid the army very well. He raised their pay and he financed campaigns along the Rhine and Dacia. So the army backed him. That's a rule that if an emperor will follow that rule, they do very well. Now, he ended up ruling for 15 years, and that's the longest reign since the Emperor Tiberius. And he maintained his power and popularity, but because of his contempt for the Senate, his life ended in murder. And this had to do with the Vestal virgins being accused of chaste, and this was a crime against the state. And he all of a sudden started seeking treason trials against Senate members. He even accused the Praetorian Guards, his commanders, two of them, of Secundus and Norbanus, of treason. So this kind of stuff was starting to get a little out of control for the Senate and the Praetorian Guards. So someone had to act. So the Praetorian Guards formed his murder, and they ended up killing Domitian in 96 AD, which subsequently ends Part A, the 1st century. In 96, it also ends the Flavian Dynasty. Next video, we will start 2nd century AD with the 5 good emperors. Now, the Roman battle record goes to 91, 39, and 4. They won 6 major engagements, losing 2 and 1 draw.